Hello and welcome back to post-concussion syndrome. Today we're looking at video 2, active recovery. So I'm going to give a quick review about video 1. We're going to talk about physiologic PCS. We're going to talk about active recovery for athletes, and then we're going to talk about using the return to sport guidelines. As a reminder, when we're talking about PCS, there are 3 main subtypes we're focusing on, and that is physiologic, vestibular ocular, and cervicogenic. While there may be, and there are, additional domains of treatment, these are the 3 main subtypes that we focus on for PCS. So a review from video 1. There was a big myth about concussions that we cleared up. There was the highlighting the energy crisis. There were the causes. There are 3 main causes and one that's not discussed in this presentation. Rowan's law, as well as recovery time. So recovery for acute concussion, and then the unconfirmed recovery from PCS. So with regards to Rowan's law, here's it displayed graphically, or hit, stop, sit. If they're suspected a concussion, if they're hit hard enough, they must stop and they must sit out the game. So it's really important for players to report their symptoms right away. So if they have any of these symptoms or any other ones, because remember, this is not an exhaustive list, then they need to report it to a team professional, a medical staff, somebody as soon as possible. Now, why is that important? Well, immediate reporting improves return to play time. This was a study done looking at the University of Florida NCAA athletes, and it was comparing immediate versus delayed removal from sport. So the immediate removal was if there was a stoppage in play, and the delayed removal was if the player did not report their symptoms until a few days later, or maybe they played out the remainder of the game. Now we're looking first at this trend line here. After 7 days, here is days missed, and on this axis, there's athletes cleared for contact as a percentage. So at our 7 days, I loosely drew up a trend line, but hopefully it's noticeable to see that our immediate removal group, this dotted line, was 70% cleared within a week. The delayed removal was below or about 40%. Then when we look at the 100% of the athletes cleared for return to play, this happened at the 15-day marker for our immediate removal. For our delayed removal group, that's at the 70-day mark. So there's 2 important things to highlight. Immediate removal and early reporting can increase the chance and the timing of your return to play. So let's focus on physiologic PCS. So symptomology, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it highlights some of the main ones for this subtype, although there is a lot of overlap with the other subtypes. The most important one is the headache, which increases in intensity by physical and cognitive activity. While we've highlighted headache here, it could also be any one of these other symptoms that increases with physical or cognitive activity. So we've written here under our pathophysiology, symptom exacerbation with physical and or cognitive activity. So again, symptom exacerbation, this is symptom increase. Usually it's felt as a headache, but it could be other symptoms like blurred vision or dizziness. Now, if you remember from video 1, there's the neurometabolic cascade that goes on in our brain. And what that was 9 steps of things that occur, but I only highlighted 2. And that's the increased ATP usage and decreased ATP production. ATP is our energy, and what that left us with was an energy crisis and a concussion. Now, this was our initial focus, but what I want to switch our focus to now is that this neurometabolic cascade also impacts our cerebral blood flow, often referred to as CBF. So with this physiologic PCS, there's still the neurometabolic cascade, but it has a big impact on our blood flow. So firstly, prescribed rest. This is the most common prescription after a concussion and also for those with persistent symptoms. Now, it's logical because the energy crisis causes a high energy demand, and the goal is to avoid secondary impact syndrome. This is not something that we're going to discuss in this presentation, but to just quickly explain, secondary impact is a very dangerous thing when you're already in this energy crisis. So rest is the first step. Now, this is a graphic that I just pulled from online, and we can see that it's still something that's talked about. No sports, no schoolwork, no computers, no video games, no TV. This may not be the best thing. Well, rest is important. It's not the only option, and it definitely doesn't mean avoiding all stimuli. We're mainly focusing on symptom exacerbation. So we want to avoid increasing our symptoms to that painful amount. Neuroplasticity. This is a very cool term, and all it means is that our brain is plastic and it can change. BDNF is one of the most important aspects with regards to changing our brain. It's highly regulated, it's involved in neuroplasticity, and it's specifically involved in these two aspects here, memory and learning. If you've ever met somebody who has dealt with a concussion, or you may have dealt with it yourself, you know that memory is one of the toughest parts. So a rat study examined forced exercise versus voluntary exercise. So it's comparing rats that were forced to run on the treadmill, the little circular wheel, and then rats that were given the freedom to run. And of course, they were matched for amount of distance ran. They found that those doing voluntary exercise, the rats that were free to run when they wanted to, had the most significant increase in BDNF in their brains. So while rat studies can't specifically translate to humans, it's something to make note of that if you're an athlete, we're not asking you to run suicides as your recovery, but some active recovery in a voluntary, controlled, and safe manner is beneficial. And we're going to talk specifically about that manner. Subsymptom heart rate threshold. This is exactly that manner. So when we hit a threshold for our heart rate, we're going to have symptom exacerbation, symptom increase. You may feel worsening headache, dizziness, any of that list. In exercise prescription, so the subsymptom heart rate threshold prescription usually is around 80 to 90% of that threshold. That way, you can exercise safely without feeling worse. It's important to note here, exercise prescription must be given by a trained clinician operating within their scope of practice. And the heart rate threshold is measured by doing tests such as the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill test or the Buffalo Concussion Bike test. So an uneven response to exercise. After a concussion, and specifically this physiologic PCS, the brain has lower sensitivity to CO2 as well as arterial CO2. This can cause hypoventilation and raise our arterial CO2 even further. So what's going on is that the exercise we do has an uneven response, and it also has an uneven cerebral blood flow. So as I mentioned, sometimes it decreases, sometimes it increases, and it may be going to different parts of the brain. So the important note is that when we exercise, our blood flow should increase, and it should be an even response all the way across the board. So the benefits of exercise. It increases that CO2 sensitivity. It also may be beneficial for BDNF in a human study. So there was only one study done on this, but they saw an increase in this specific. It also normalizes all these aspects. So our arterial CO2, our CBF, our exercise ventilation. So that's that hypoventilation we saw on the last slide. And of course, our exercise tolerance. So if we keep exercising, we do not become deconditioned, especially for the athletes. So our return to sport guideline. This again was the concussion consensus statement and their graduated return to sport guideline, that 6-step guideline here. Initially, rest should be 24 to 48 hours, and that's cognitive and physical rest but general rest. That doesn't mean avoiding all stimuli. We're just trying to avoid symptom increase and a secondary impact. What's important to note is that 24 hours or longer should be spent at each step. If the symptoms get worse, then go back to the previous step and spend 24 hours or longer. Any resistance training should be done at stage 3 or 4, so sports specific or non-contact. And the final quote from this consensus statement that I want to mention is that if symptoms are persistent for more than 10 to 14 days in adults or 1 month in children, the athlete should be referred to a healthcare professional who is an expert in the management of concussion. So this is our PCS flowchart for recovery. If you're suffering from persistent symptoms, then we got to hop on the BCTT. If you have symptom exacerbation, then this falls under the Physiologic PCS subtype. And as we just explained in this video, that means you're going to be put on the exercise protocol of daily exercise below your heart rate threshold. And again, that's got to be from a trained clinician. If you do not have symptom increase, so no symptom exacerbation, then we know it's either one of the other 2 subtypes, vestibular ocular or cervicogenic. Video 3 is going to be the BCTT. Video 4 is going to be these 2 subtypes. So as I just mentioned, next video, we're going to be talking about this treadmill test. We're going to talk about the visual analog scale, rating of perceived exertion, as well as stopping criteria, and then how to give that prescription. Thank you very much for listening. See you guys in the next video.